Hi everybody! Sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight to present in person. But with this video, I'm gonna give you the overview of what I researched in this case study on NAFTA and the transboundary effects it has on the environment. My topic specifically was the hazardous waste and the impact that NAFTA has had on the production of hazardous waste, and then that production's impact on the environment. So first, to give a little background, with the passing of NAFTA, there's been a great increase in the amount of manufacturing that takes place in Mexico, and now there are more than 3,000 maquiladoras, sorry if I mispronounced that, along the border of Mexico. And what these are factories run by the U.S. but are in Mexico. And the reason that this happened was because Mexico has less strict regulations on environment and waste, and therefore the U.S. is moving a lot of their production across the border because it's a lot cheaper for them labor-wise, and cleaning up environmentally wise. Instead of dealing with the EPA over here in the US, they're just moving across the border because it's cheaper for them. And so then each of these green dots here are signifying how many maquiladoras there are in that specific area. So the greater the circle, the more production that takes place in that area. So before the passing of NAFTA, it was considered illegal to transport hazardous waste across borders. So then when NAFTA came along, the agreement considered hazardous waste to be a quote-unquote good. And what this means is that if the U.S. wanted to have something made, like a good made, and a part of that good was going to be produced in Mexico, whatever waste was produced developing that good in Mexico would then have to be transported back with the good. So the country of origin would have to dispose of it, and that country that was producing it wouldn't have to worry about getting rid of it, or so on and so forth. So this was NAFTA's way of trying to regulate so that one country wouldn't be trumped by the other when it came to hazardous waste. So if the US is making all the money, but Mexico has to deal with the hazardous waste, you know, that whole idea. So that was all within good intentions, but regulation of NAFTA has not been the greatest, according to the literature. And it was found that only about 1/5 of the waste is being sent back to the US. So this has resulted in I think approximately 20 million tons of hazardous waste being produced each year in Mexico. And then with only 1/5 being sent back to the US, and Mexico only having the resources to deal with 2 million tons of that waste, there's a lot of waste being illegally dumped all over Mexico, and it's starting to cause a lot of public health problems. I mean, it's entering the streams, it's entering, it's affecting wildlife, it's affecting drinking water, so on and so forth. So people can't grow crops, they can't drink the water, and it's just causing this huge issue among the communities of Mexico. So both Mexico and the US have established efforts to improve the environment along the border. Back in 1983, the La Paz Agreement was signed in efforts to deal with the environmental issues that were arising because of the increased manufacturing. And what this was basically a treaty between the two countries to agree to work together to improve the environment and decrease the amount of public health issues that are seen because of those environmental issues. So, in the original was passed in 1983. In extension to that, there was Border 2012 that was implemented, and this was an emphasizing of the original agreement and another run at or a refreshing of the agreement to further efforts in cleaning up the environment along the border. Now there has now been another effort or another improvement with Border 2020 that is now effective now, working on research and resources and infrastructure to make that environment a lot cleaner. So in regards to that, Annex 3 of the La Paz Agreement actually deals with the issue that comes with NAFTA, with the transboundary shipment of hazardous waste. And this is constantly looking at improvements of how they can improve the transport of hazardous waste and make sure that countries are being held accountable for the waste that they produce with their production. As much as we'd like to think that Border 2020 is working and solving the issue, there are still gaps, like with Healthy People 2020, that need to be addressed in order to see the improvement that we want among the environment when dealing with hazardous waste that is a result of NAFTA. So there were 3 recommendations that were made in an article that was found. One was making companies more accountable for the waste that they produce. This is more of an enforcement thing, making sure that companies are keeping track of the waste that they produce and then taking responsibility for that waste when it comes to shipping it back and paying for the removal of that hazardous waste. Secondly, there was the improvement of Mexico's waste regulation and proper treatment plants, with only being able to deal with 2 million tons of the waste out of the 20 million tons that are being produced each year. There needs to be more plants that are able to get rid of that hazardous waste. Also, there needs to be an improvement in the waste regulation. So like here in the US, we have the EPA. Mexico needs to have something that parallels that governmental agency that's keeping track and making sure that companies are staying accountable for the hazardous waste they produce. Then thirdly, there is a better tracking system. What was being found was that when the good gets transferred to Mexico to be produced, there was the company lost sight of the hazardous waste that was produced in that product, and therefore they didn't have to claim it coming back because there was nothing keeping track of who produced what waste and who should have to pay for that waste disposal. So then there is the recognition of a better tracking system so that when a good gets produced across the border, the waste goes back with it, and that company is again held more accountable for the disposal of that waste. So with these 3 things and the continued efforts of Border 2020, it is a hope that NAFTA can not make as much of an effect on the environment as it was originally intended. So there will be continued efforts throughout the upcoming years. And that's all I have. So thank you.